You're going to need one of these and probably one of these to watch this video, because this week I discovered YogiOabs. He says he's a new Christian and a life coach who teaches men to be men and how to get their women to obey them. But in this video that I'm reviewing, his misogyny is eclipsed by his gender-critical, I would say opinions, but his complete lack of comprehension of gender issues. Opinion is too generous a word. He lies, he can't read, he can't understand the things that he does read, and he can't do simple internet searches. I can't help wondering if he's for real, or if he's just another attention seeker saying the most ridiculous things that he can think of that might get him views. He certainly sounds like he takes him seriously, but you should not. Here's why. Hello and welcome. I have two new patrons to announce, Nevin Hard and Junie the Apostate. Nevin was my guest on Tuesday on the stream Overcoming Calvinism. If you missed it, check it out to meet Nevin. Junie was a guest on Halloween with Granny. If you'd like to get to know her better, she also has a YouTube channel, which I will link in the description. YogiOabs has 51,000 subscribers, so if he's only in this for the attention, he has been successful. But if his intent is to seek truth, I don't think he could identify truth from falsehood if he tried. On the other hand, I don't think he's even trying. Here's what I mean.
So there is a woman, I think they identify as both a woman and a female, which is contrary to what you're actually supposed to do as a transgender person. But
a transgender woman isn't supposed to identify as a woman and a female. How does he think a woman is supposed to identify? And who made him the identity police on deciding how people may and may not identify themselves? He thinks he's some kind of authority on transgender issues, but he doesn't even know the most basic of terminology. I identify as a woman and a female. So does a trans woman. What is he expecting? Some women to identify as a woman and a male? Or a man and a female? That doesn't even make sense. For a non-binary person, maybe, but we're not talking non-binary here.
this person named Zinnia, who goes by Adult Demon Female, says that children should be forced on puberty-blocking drugs until they can consent to what gender they actually want to be.
He doesn't support that statement until later in the video, so I'll skip ahead to where he does and then come back. Here's what he's referring to.
So this person says, if children can't consent to puberty blockers, which cause any permanent changes, even with the relevant professional evaluation, how can they consent to the permanent and irreversible changes that come with their own puberty with no professional evaluation whatsoever?
YogiOabs' biggest problem is that he can't read. Listen again to how he reads this and how he changes one crucial word to completely misunderstand what Zinnia is saying.
Which cause any permanent changes, cause.
Yogi thinks that puberty blockers cause permanent damage. His entire problem is giving children drugs that will change them for life. But no one is advocating for that. Not Zinnia, not anyone. The goal with puberty blockers is to pause puberty, to slow down the process, to give the child a chance to decide if they want their body to go through the changes of puberty or not. Dude, if you're going to make a response video, at least read what you're responding to. But going back to Yogi's earlier claim, he said,
children should be forced on puberty-blocking drugs until they can consent to what gender they actually want to be.
But nowhere does Zinnia say all children should take these. He doesn't offer any support for this until near the end of the video. He jumps around a lot.
So that basically means that starting at the age of 7 or 8, They get put on these drugs and live as a eunuch for 8 to 10 years. And then when they're 16 or 18, whatever people decide, they can consent to being a boy or a girl and whatnot.
First, no one wants all kids on puberty blockers. Second, do you even know what a eunuch is? Given the definition of a eunuch, there's no such thing as a girl eunuch. A eunuch, by definition, is a castrated male. Puberty blockers do not cause castration, so no one can become a eunuch by taking puberty blockers. The word you are looking for isn't eunuch, it's prepubescent. Before reaching puberty, children aren't eunuchs, they're prepubescent. Next, Yogi goes completely hypocritical.
First problem with this tweet is thinking that professional evaluation is the arbiter of truth. Professional who is a psychologist, highly leftist, highly biased.
But his sponsor?
This video is brought to you by Anti-Feminist Apparel, and specifically I have one item to share with you that is highly relevant to this video, and it is the pronouns shirt that I've made for you guys, because if transgender people were honest, their pronouns would actually be he/she, because a lot of them are he, she's. So you can pick up this shirt at my Redbubble storefront, which is the storefront that has the Feminism is Cancer designs, because those are banned by my print provider.
No, he's not biased. Plus, he claims to have a sponsor, but his sponsor is himself. And doesn't the fact that your print provider has banned your merch tell you that maybe your merch is offensive? Calling anything that isn't cancer, cancer is offensive. If you don't think you're biased, Yogi, take a look at your own merch. But wait, there's more. This is Yogi's website. What does he do for a living? He gives professional evaluation as to how people should express their gender. If this isn't a way to arrive at truth, what are you doing with your life? Are you life coaching people to believe lies? Is your coaching all about expressing an opinion and there's no actual truth in it? If so, what are your clients paying for? But that's not all you get. Yes, guys and gals and non-binary pals, you get 3 hypocritical points from just one ad. He has a he/she shirt, too. I haven't heard this slur since the 70s. I don't know when this guy was born, but I don't think he was even alive in the 70s. Yogi, no one who understands what it means to be transgender and has even an ounce of compassion in them uses this slur. But from your merch, I would say that your point is not to be right, not to find truth, or show compassion, or be helpful in any way towards your fellow man, but you just want to be offensive, biased, rude, and opinionated.
And the next thing that you should really know is that we shouldn't take people like this serious.
Should people take you seriously? With how offensive you aim to be, I'm guessing you don't expect anyone to take you seriously. Do you even take yourself seriously? Is this just an act to get attention? These next few clips are in order with no edits from me other than to break in with my own comments. But he jumps from topic to topic, not finishing one thought before jumping to another.
Because they have a mental illness.
Okay, now he's going to tell us how being transgender fits the DSM.
Now, a study that was published in 2019 actually found that 1 in 4 transgender people, but especially non-binary transgender people.
1 in 4 transgender people. He has a study up about autistic traits. Does he think transgender people are autistic? He never does get to this. He never says anything about the study he brings up, except that a study was done. Okay, down his rabbit trail on non-binary people.
Which is a very interesting oxymoron, because transgender people, they say they're non-conforming, but they're actually conforming to the gender they want to be.
Transgender people conform to the gender they want to be. Yes, that's part of what being transgender is about. You feel you are a particular gender and you act in accordance with the gender that you feel you are. That's what transgender is. So what's your problem? Why don't you understand? Are you thinking trans women should act like men and gender criticals like you will find them non-conforming because they act like their birth gender and not their preferred gender? If they did that, you would never know they were trans. That's also called being in the closet. Some trans people do this, not because they want to, but because they feel they are forced to hide their identity.
So how do you be non-binary and transgender when you actually try to conform to the gender that is opposite to the one that you were born as?
Actually, this is a little difficult. Non-binary is a subset of transgender people. Anyone that doesn't identify with their birth sex is transgender. Some transgender people identify only with the opposite sex. Some transgender people identify with both sexes. These people are called gender fluid. Non-binary people don't identify anywhere on this spectrum. They identify with an entirely different spectrum that doesn't have male and female. They don't see themselves as either. They are still transgender because they don't identify with their birth sex, but they don't identify with male or female either. Non-binary people don't try to conform to anything. They are non-conforming to both sexes. You are just very confused. Maybe you should try making a video about something you actually understand.
So anyway, especially the non-binary people are much more likely to have undiagnosed autism, actual autism.
If it's undiagnosed, how can you call it actual autism? If it's undiagnosed, they have not been identified as having autism. Not only that, the study you are reading from doesn't say what you claim it says. Again, if you want to do a video on something, you actually have to read it first. Here is the actual study that he is looking at. You see, it's the same one that he had on the screen a bit ago. Let's read the entire thing together. Sorry if you find this a bit tedious, but it is short, and the actual study is helpful in directing how to counsel transgender people, so bear with me. Background. Autism spectrum traits are increasingly being reported in individuals who identify as transgender, and the presence of such traits have implications for clinical support. To date, little is known about autism traits in individuals who identify as non-binary. Aims to empirically contribute to current research by examining autistic traits in a self-identifying transgender and non-binary gender group. Method: 177 participants responded to a survey consisting of the autism spectrum quotient, the empathy quotient, the systematizing quotient, and the reading the mind in the eyes task. Comparisons were made between cisgender, transgender, and non-binary groups. Results: individuals with autism spectrum disorder or meeting the AQ cutoff score for ASD were overrepresented in both the transgender and non-binary groups. The key variables differentiating the transgender and non-binary groups from the cisgender group were the systematizing and empathy. Levels of autistic traits and cases of ASD were higher in individuals assigned female at birth than those assigned male at birth. Conclusions: a proportion of individuals seeking help and advice about gender identity will also present autistic traits and, in some cases, undiagnosed autism. Lower levels of empathy, diminished theory of mind ability, and literalness may impede the delivery of effective support. Clinicians treating transgender and non-binary individuals should also consider whether clients, especially those assigned female at birth, have an undiagnosed ASD. The words 1 in 4 do not appear anywhere in the study. The study indicates that if you are a therapist working with transgender patients, particularly patients assigned female at birth, the patient is more likely than the general population to have some autism traits and possibly have undiagnosed autism. That's it. It says nothing about 1 in 4 transgender or non-binary people having autism. Autism is a spectrum and is very complicated. For more information, contact Autism Now. There are other links in the description for more information on autism.
And I believe this person is one of those people, just judging by the way they write on their blog, how logical they are, how much they're trying to back up their views with highly biased leftist medical science.
First, he is making a diagnosis that Zinnia is autistic based on a study he clearly didn't read that doesn't list any of the traits of autism, and then concludes that Zinnia is autistic because she is logical, biased, and scientific. Being logical is a sign of autism? Using science to back you up is a sign of autism? This guy clearly has no clue what autism is. He can't read, yet he considers himself qualified to make a medical diagnosis from a tweet.
So I think it's very important in this discussion to emphasize that these people need to get treated for their mental illness.
I'm not sure if these people is non-binary people with autism, or people who use logic and science, or all people on Twitter. Who is he diagnosing now?
So let's take a look at what this adult female demon, I should say she should call herself adult woman demon, because female and male, those are notions of sex, not gender. And transgender people are about changing their gender, not their sex.
And once again, he displays his complete ignorance. Transgender people are absolutely about changing their sex. Their gender is the way they identify. They want to change their sex to match their gender. They choose to do it in different ways. Some choose to dress in the manner of their identified sex, and no more. Some choose hormone therapy to change their appearance, and some choose sex reassignment surgery. But all identify with a sex or sexes, not just a gender, other than what they were assigned at birth. We've reached the point where we skipped ahead to earlier, so now we pick up with his argument regarding puberty blockers.
A professional who is, a psychologist, highly leftist, highly biased person.
So all psychologists are highly leftist and biased? As I started looking into this, he's actually stumbled onto a real issue here. An issue that he doesn't go any further into, but it is worth discussing. First, to be unbiased in treating patients, one has to understand and show some level of empathy toward the patient's problem. If someone having problems being accepted as gay goes to a therapist that doesn't accept gay people, the therapist won't understand the problem or be able to help. Progressives are no more likely to have issues that require therapy than conservatives. But the issues that progressives have are more likely to be related to their stance as progressives than the issues that conservatives have. This is true because conservatives, by definition, support societal norms, and being in the norm is rarely a cause for problems. To be understanding of the issues usually means being accepting of them, which makes you a liberal. So it's easy to see why more therapists would be liberal. But when I started looking into this, I was surprised to see that Yogi's actually right about this. I found this article which says, University of Virginia psychological scientist Jonathan Haidt at the 2011 gathering the Society for Personal and Social Psychology, addressing an audience of more than 1,000, the best-selling author of The Righteous Mind asked all those who considered themselves politically conservative to raise their hands. 3 hands went up. Then he described 2 other attempts that he had recently made to locate conservative social psychologists. He searched the internet for conservative social psychologist, and he had asked a small sample of social psychologists to name just one ideologically conservative colleague. These efforts together turned up a single conservative social psychologist. These small, informal efforts have big implications. They point to a statistically impossible lack of diversity in the field. Haidt has since argued a worrisome situation that almost certainly fosters discrimination against both colleagues and students and, what's more, may be skewing the entire research enterprise. Yoel Inbar and Joris Lamars of Tilburg University did in 2 anonymous online surveys of personality and social psychologists to verify the widespread impression of a pervasive liberal bias in the field. But they wanted to drill down even further asking, are there really no conservative social psychologists, or are they just well hidden? Are some liberal on social issues, but perhaps more moderate or even conservative on economic questions or foreign policy issues? If they are deliberately hiding their politics and values, why? The findings clearly confirm the field's liberal bias. And this article from Robert Mather, Psychology Today. Political inclusivity is not a strength of the mental health profession, and ideological biases have implications for clinical practice. When I began writing for Psychology Today in March of 2016, I had no idea how politics would shift to define every element of our culture in the coming 4 years. Many conservative graduate students from across the U.S. have contacted me with frustrations of navigating their university climate, where they feel they are stigmatized, mischaracterized, and afraid to contribute their views to discussions. Some faculty members across the U.S. have contacted me with the same issues. Answering questions and providing mentorship to conservative students and faculty across the world has been one of the most rewarding and unexpected parts of my career. However, I did not anticipate the large number of conservatives who would contact me for medical health advice. I am a researcher, not a clinician. It was easy to be optimistic and offer support to the academics, having tiptoed through the career minefield myself. Guiding everyone else to treatment proved more challenging and revealed a huge blind spot in mental health. Side note to Junk Shop Library. This might be a good topic for Mental Health Thursday one week. Here I will try to speak for the conservatives who have reached out to me. They view the mental health profession as filled with social justice activists who will judge them harshly for their values and try to change their conservative value system. They most often cite family and religion as the values they fear will be judged or changed. Regardless of political affiliation, clients are often reluctant to seek mental health assistance for fear of stigmatization. Whether or not a particular counselor will do so is hard to predict, but counselors are trained to be as objective as possible. However, if a person believes that they will be persecuted for their beliefs that are not part of why they are being treated, they will not go to treatment. That means conservatives with mental health issues may not seek treatment if they believe politics will become a central issue in their counseling sessions. Counselors should not publicly identify their political beliefs to better serve this population, as that would take away from the impartial nature of their work. Instead, the mental health community should commit to welcome conservatives for treatment and assure them that they will not be stigmatized. Here is an example of a modified response that I have given to a conservative seeking a conservative counselor. I don't know if I will be able to find a conservative counselor. If you are religious, it is sometimes easier to find a conservative religious counselor, but even then, it can be challenging. Over the years, I have asked many counselors about politics being relevant to therapy. Uniformly, they all say that politics do not matter in how they apply their trade. As a scientist who studies biases, I know that is not true. However, I am genuinely convinced that good counselors actively work to control those biases. A big part of therapy is developing trust in that relationship between the client and counselor. If politics are at a root of a person's issue, i.e., someone's politics are causing distress in their relationships, then politics does come into the equation. In this politically charged climate of the 2020 election and the COVID-19 global pandemic, politics are at the root of many stresses. This is evidenced by the fact that I have been contacted by people seeking conservative psychologists much more frequently in the past 2 weeks. Shannon Q has done some excellent videos on exposing bad Christian counselors who don't have psychology degrees and they only have certificates from unaccredited sources. I'll link a couple of those videos in the description. But when the universities are biased against the conservatives, it is understandable that they would turn to alternative sources to get credentials, even if fake credentials, so that they can offer their advice. Unfortunately, they end up with people like Yogi here offering bad advice from an untrained source. This is a serious issue, however, and it deserves serious attention. Conservatives have mental health issues too. We see it all the time in Trump supporters. They need empathy and a listening ear too. It's how they got where they are. Frustration at feeling that their voice isn't being heard. So Yogi is right that the field of psychology does have a liberal bias. There is a need for conservative-minded or at least sympathetic counselors. Leaving them with nowhere to turn, they end up like Yogi here, unable to put together a coherent argument and just spouting whatever comes into their heads. And the crazier it sounds, the more attention it gets. And thus, inadvertently, we reinforce the value of such ideas.
Psychologist, highly leftist, highly biased person, how can they decide what gender a child should be? I mean, what type of science is it that informs this person's practice to where they could evaluate if someone should become a boy, if a child should become a girl?
It isn't the psychologist that decides what gender a child should be. The child comes to the psychologist with their parents because they are experiencing dysphoria, distress about trying to live in a body that doesn't conform to their self-image. They don't come to the psychologist asking, "What gender am I?" as Yogi implies. No one is asking psychologists to identify people's gender for them.
These are obviously God-given things that we're born with. And for people who just cringe at anybody who talks about God, it's literally, your genitalia. Just look down and you know what sex and gender you are.
Several errors in this statement. First, sex and gender are not the same. This is the primary hurdle for everyone who doesn't understand what it is to be transgender. Your sex, but not your gender, is determined by your genitalia. Second, genitalia is not always clear, even when it comes to sex. Some people are intersex. It's about 3% of the population. If you're thinking 3% isn't a substantially significant number, it's certainly not sufficient to consider them a naturally occurring people group, look at it this way. 3% of the population has red hair. 3% of the population has green eyes. If 3% of the population is too small to consider their characteristics as one of the options of what sex they are, then red hair should not be considered a natural hair color, and green eyes should not be considered a natural eye color. Intersex people are real people too. They are non-binary from birth. Yet birth certificates require a doctor or midwife to choose male or female to assign the baby at birth, even if the baby is intersex. If the sex is determined by God, as you say, then God has determined the sex of a significant portion of the population to be neither male nor female. Neither male nor female is a normal and natural state. The fact that you don't understand this doesn't make you an authority on the matter. Why would anyone think they are an authority on something they don't even understand?
We don't really need professional evaluation to decide if a boy should become a boy at the age of 8, because it's really right before puberty when the discussion of whether or not kids should be placed on puberty blockers comes into play here.
Now even he acknowledges that what he said about Zinnia is completely false. It's subtle. He accuses Zinnia of saying all children should be put on puberty blockers until they are old enough to decide their gender for themselves. Yet here he clearly acknowledges that no, only those seeking professional help are referred to by Zinnia, not all children. Second, no, the psychologist doesn't make the determination at age 8 if a boy should be a boy or not. The determination in question is whether puberty should be delayed, not what gender the child is. A little background on the issue, as Yogi doesn't give you the context for this entire issue. In the UK, on December 1st, one day before this tweet from Zinnia, the High Court decided that children are unable to consent to treatment that could be life-altering. The case involves a young person who, after 3 therapy sessions at age 16, went on puberty blockers. Then at age 17, went on hormones, and at age 20, had a double mastectomy. But now says it was a mistake. This person does not feel any more comfortable in their current body than they did before treatment. Suit was brought because this person says their ability to have children was affected. But as Zinnia points out in the tweet and was recognized by the court, puberty blockers do not cause any permanent changes. The ruling of the court was based on a slippery slope rationale. Many children that start on puberty blockers later move to alternate sex hormones to transition. It is at this point in the process that irreversible changes can occur, not at 8 or 10 as Yogi implies. Children as old as 16 were determined by the court to be unable to decide for themselves whether they should be even put on puberty blockers, which do not cause permanent changes. Now we get to Zinnia's point. If children, even with counseling, cannot consent to puberty blockers that cause no permanent changes, how can children consent to the irreversible changes that come with their own puberty with no professional evaluation whatsoever? In other words, nature doesn't ask for consent to begin changing a child's body at puberty. If a child doesn't want those changes or is unsure that they want those changes, why can the child not consent to having the changes temporarily blocked to give the child more time to decide what they want their body to grow into? I'm not going to go into what the age of medical consent should be. That's a whole video in itself. But Zinnia makes a very good point. If nature can make permanent changes and we have the technology to stop it, children, with the guidance of parents and professional counselors, should be able to determine that the time for puberty has not arrived, without interference from the courts. The case is a bad one. The permanent changes that the plaintiff underwent didn't begin until she was 17. And while 17 is still a minor in the UK, the age of medical consent there is 16. The plaintiff didn't even start on puberty blockers until age 16, the age of consent. Yet the court ruled that younger children cannot consent to this treatment, despite the fact that this question was not even brought before the court. The decision is far overreaching. It was a bad decision that put in jeopardy the medical treatment of many adolescents in the UK. This case is far from over. It leaves too many questions unanswered, like, can children get any medical treatment that can permanently change their lives? Back to Yogi.
But her problem with this is that she feels that puberty is a permanent change. And
it's not that she feels this way. It's a scientific fact. You can do an experiment to prove it. Look at any child before and after puberty, and there will be permanent changes. Watch the person through life, and the body never reverts back to a child's state. Yep, it's a permanent change.
We don't question for normal people who are called cis people whether or not it's okay for a boy to continue being a boy when there is the availability to become a girl. At least that's what they think.
What? Real quick. Cis people aren't normal people. No one is trying to turn boys into girls just because it's possible. And I don't speak for Zinnia, but if I could, on her behalf, I would say, you have no fucking clue what I think. Stop trying.
That's not a fact. They think you can trick yourself into becoming a girl by taking hormones.
Taking hormones doesn't trick someone into becoming a girl. Puberty blockers are not hormones. Zinnia is talking about puberty blockers that don't cause any permanent changes. They don't turn boys into girls. He reminds me of...
They turn the friggin' frogs gay!
What this person wants is, at the age of 7 or 8, whatever, to be placed on puberty blockers and then placed on further drugs and hormones that help you develop puberty or come as close to it as possible.
When my kids were young and they asked me to predict the future or what someone else was thinking, I would say, "Swami Mommy sees," and then I would make some kind of guess. Yogi must see himself as some kind of swami or mind reader that can tell what Zinnia is thinking just from reading a tweet. Despite Zinnia saying nothing about who should take puberty blockers, somehow Yogi can read her mind and see that she thinks that all children should be taking puberty blockers. Yogi, since you can predict so much from a single tweet, how about predicting the next Powerball?
So the age of informed consent, I think you can consent to some things medically at the age of 16, but generally I believe it's 18 years old.
Dude, there is something called the internet. You can find this out with a very simple search like I did. In the UK, where this case is, it's 16. As I was making this, I was wondering where Yogi is from. His ideas align more with Islamic cultures, so I was wondering if maybe that was his upbringing. But no, he's from the US.
I could not suffer more years at that school or in that city, especially in Portland, Oregon,
He is educationally challenged.
because I was suspended from my university. And I had the opportunity, the rule is if you're suspended after 1 year of a leave, a forced academic leave,
Which is why he's incapable of reading a tweet or doing a simple internet search to support his claims. Not sure why he thinks he has mind-reading abilities.
because if the kid is on puberty blockers because you believe they should have the right to consent to what gender they want to live as, why do you not realize that they should also have the right to consent to not being on puberty blockers? Trying to argue the obvious with these people obviously is not possible.
Dude, you don't get it. That's exactly what Zinnia is advocating for. That children with the guidance of parents and professional counselors should have the right to decide if they want to be on puberty blockers or not. The problem is the court has said that they do not have the right to decide. It sounds like you actually agree with Zinnia. You just don't realize it because you don't understand what you're responding to. Sadly, this guy that can't understand this simple tweet claims that women shouldn't be allowed to vote because our reading comprehension isn't as good as a man's.
But the fact that this crazy person, this adult demon female, doesn't seem to realize that we don't have time machines. And if you give a kid a puberty blocker, they can't go back and then say, oh, you know what, I actually wanted to live from 8 years old to 16 years old as a boy, as I was intended to be. This is just so dangerous. This is promoting the abuse of children.
Puberty blockers don't make a boy not a boy. He thinks this is child abuse because he thinks puberty blockers turn boys into girls. If puberty blockers actually had the power that he thinks they have, transitioning would be a far less complicated procedure.
And the fact that we don't see this as absolutely sick is what is wrong with society.
We don't see it as absolutely sick because, unlike you, some of us actually know a little bit about what these drugs do and don't do. Maybe you should let the adults handle this.
It's literally a position that permanent changes are fine as long as you're not trans. So this is where this person doesn't seem to understand very basic facts about how boys and girls develop. So puberty isn't the only transition, the only experience that is specific to a gender. So boys and girls begin acting like boys and girls well before puberty.
Exactly. That's how we know that some children, even before puberty, are or might be transgender. You are beginning to see the problem? Maybe?
And when you read this person's writing, you can clearly see it sounds quite male. They're citing a lot of studies. They're hyper-logical. They're hyper-argumentative, hyper-disagreeable. It seems very male in nature, but this person wants to identify as a female.
Here's where I think his only point is to be offensive. He accuses Zinnia of being male or having male characteristics, but I have all the characteristics that he lists. He adds the word hyper to cover the fact that women are logical, women cite studies, and women make arguments. He considers these to be male characteristics. So a female that has these characteristics can't be a real female. Yogi, I am and have always been female. Using logic, backing your points with studies and facts, and using reasoned arguments are not male traits. If they are, then you, Yogi, are showing yourself to be female. Your reading comprehension is poor. Your reasoning is poor. You have no facts or studies to back up what you say. I don't actually think that. Those are not sex-based characteristics. Zinnia is no more male for having those characteristics than you are female for lacking them.
And this person concludes that an inability to offer informed consent or understand the long-term consequences is actually an argument for putting every single cis and trans person on puberty blockers until they acquire that ability. So they're saying until they are at the age where they can understand informed consent, which is just, standard medical practice where you have to consent to potentially dangerous medical procedures.
Here, you see why Yogi thinks Zinnia is advocating for all children to be on puberty blockers, but he clearly doesn't understand the tweet. He never mentioned the court case in the UK that is the basis of the argument. It's possible he's unaware of the case and that the court decided that children can't receive this treatment. If that's the case, it's understandable that he doesn't know what Zinnia is talking about. But really, if you're going to make a response video, you need to know the subject matter that you're responding to, and Yogi clearly doesn't. I'll try to explain it so even Yogi can understand. Zinnia is saying that if it is true, as the court said, that children cannot consent to or understand the long-term consequences of life-altering changes that come with puberty, then this would actually be an argument for putting off puberty until they can decide, not an argument against it, as the court has concluded. She's saying the result of the court's decision is the opposite of what the court's logic would seem to call for. She's not advocating for puberty blockers for all. She's saying that if children can't make this decision, then logically we should put off that decision, not make the decision for the child by denying them the medical treatment that would allow them to put off the decision. Make sense now? Do you understand it now? The final tweet that Yogi looks at, Zinnia actually gives Yogi the perfect response to his video, despite the video being a response to her.
If you don't understand that use of puberty blockers is always followed by basically cross-sex hormone therapy, which helps you continue the puberty for the gender that you want to be, you have no place saying anything about this topic. But actually, Zinnia, I am well aware of that.
No, you aren't. First, you again failed to actually read the tweet, and as a result, you completely misunderstood what she said. She said puberty blockers are always followed by undergoing puberty. You skipped this part because it doesn't say what you wanted it to say. Zinnia said after puberty blockers, a child either decides to go through puberty for their assigned birth sex, or they take cross-sex hormones and go through puberty for the opposite sex. But because you want to accuse Zinnia of some big agenda to get children to be transgender, you completely skip the part where she says either one is a valid option. And Zinnia is right. Because you don't understand that the purpose of puberty blockers is not to cause transition, but to delay puberty for a child with gender dysphoria until the child is old enough to decide whether or not they want to transition. You have absolutely no place in saying anything about this topic to anyone. The only thing keeping me from calling this guy the biggest dick I've ever encountered is that he would probably take that as a compliment. Until next time, live your life.